All right, golfers, if you're somebody who's struggling to try to get the hand path on the deeper side, meaning you're trying to work the arm plane a little bit flatter, but you're having some issues doing it, the timing or the sequence of when the hands actually get deeper does matter. In a lot of cases, when I see players struggling with this, the number one thing that stands out to me every time is that they get them way too inside, way too early, effectively maximizing how deep they can actually get. And then there's an instinctual reaction from the body to try to create some space, and you'll see the hands work very high late in the backswing. And so this oftentimes comes with too early of a hip turn. You know, at the end of the day, our hips and our arms and everything is connected, right? So if I just leave my arm alone here and I rotate in my backswing, the more rotation I have, the more my hand path is going to want to work around me in this direction. Now, if I have too much hip turn too early, along with the hands going inside too much, meaning I'm trying to work the hand path deeper, but I'm maximizing everything really early on like this, where my hips have peaked and my hands are very inside, and obviously the club's going to go with it. There comes a point where my hand path now is going to get effectively stuck, and now I no longer have the ability to utilize my lower body in the second half of the backswing to actually keep getting the hands around me. So what I typically will see is the golfer gets really early with, really inside really early with a lot of hip turn, and then from here the hands, because the hips essentially max out how much rotation they can get, you'll rarely see the golfer continue to shove the arm across the chest. It just can feel very stuck and it can get too extreme. And so what ends up happening is from here, you'll see a lot of elevation to the second half of the backswing. The golfer's trying to create some space, but also they don't have the hips to actually help them get deeper. And so we want to try to sequence this pattern correctly, where it's not super important to get the hands as inside as possible at the start of the takeaway, but rather obviously at the top of the backswing, that's where we really would want to get those hands in that flatter position, especially for golfers who are too upright and they get too steep and they're trying to shallow things out. And so in a situation like that, what you want to do is you want to actually change the timing of when the hips are opening up. You want to allow the hips to open up in the second half of the backswing so that you can guarantee that in the latter stages of your backswing, your hands are still working around you because the hips are going to help you get there, right? Especially if you're somebody who basically maxes out the hip turn, maxes out the hand depth early, and then there's a lot of elevation later. So what would you do in that situation? Well, you're going to work through a two-step drill. And the purpose or the idea of this drill is to basically do exactly what I said, which is to change the timing of when the hands and the hips are going to open up. So if I start off my takeaway trying to still work the hands a little bit inside, I don't want to see any sort of disconnection where the lead arm is like completely separating from the chest, but I'm trying to work the hands inside without the help of the hips. So what I'm doing is I'm guaranteeing some connection here between my lead arm and my chest at the start of my takeaway, right? You can even do some one-handed drills. I usually like to take the trail hand and put it underneath, basically in the armpit, and just do some rotation where I'm feeling some connection here. I'm not feeling separated, so that's going to guarantee that the hands are going to work around me early. But I want you to do it in the takeaway without the help of the hip turn. So why is this important? Well, basically what you're doing in this situation is you are delaying when the hips open up. It's not that I'm restricting the hips in the backswing. I very much will want you to make a full turn to the top, utilize the legs, really transfer your pressure and your weight and all of that. But the reason why I'm delaying them is so that if I can guarantee that the hands are still working inside without the help of the hips in my takeaway, so something like this, once I add the hip turn in the second half of the backswing, well, the hip turn is going to actually help my hands continue to get around me. Whereas if I get the hands in a similar position in the takeaway, but with my hips already peaked, my hips can no longer help me work the hand path deeper in the second half of the backswing. If you're somebody who's here, the only way to get the hands deeper now, you have to shove the arms across the body. Like I said, it's going to feel very stuck, overly connected, not a lot of room, and golfers hate the feeling of being trapped, right? We like freedom of space and movement. And so in the scenario that I'm working through, this two-step drill here, if I can work the hand path inside early, but without the hip turn, now when I add the hip turn in the second half of this backswing here, well, the hip turn is helping my hands work flatter in the second half of the backswing, so I won't go here and then have a ton of elevation where it's like all arms in the second half of the backswing, but rather hands are working inside slightly to here on their own, add the hip turn in the second half of the backswing. Now my arm plane gets flatter, but without the sensation of being stuck because my hips are the ones that are getting me there. And now I'm sequencing the hands and the lower body to all finish the backswing at a similar time. Whereas oftentimes, not to jump ahead too much, but if I see golfers have too much hip turn early and then it's all arms, you'll see all arms or some sort of negative reaction in transition as well. So the timing of when your hips are actually opening up makes such a big difference if you're struggling to try to get the hand path deeper. Bear in mind, if you're somebody who has a lot of hip turn early, but then the hand path does continue to work around the body and you don't have that sensation of being stuck, don't change it just for the sake of this video. Like, by all means, keep doing exactly what you're doing. This is specifically for those of you who have too much hip turn early, get the hands really inside, but then in the second half of the backswing, there's a lot of arm elevation where you're struggling to keep those hands in a flatter spot and everything kind of just works up and then gets steep on you on the way down. That's where I would change the timing of when the hips are opening up, work the hands inside without the hips, add the hip turn in the second half of the backswing. Might feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but with more and more practice, you'll get that timing dialed in, and you'll be able to actually guarantee that the hands will be flatter, later into the backswing, okay?